The office building was alive with the sounds of a normal weekday. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, and the murmur of conversation floated through the air. People moved quickly, walking with purpose, glancing at their watches, rushing from one meeting to another. Everyone seemed busy, focused on their own world, their own tasks. In the middle of it all, a janitor moved quietly through the hallways. His uniform was simple, his broom worn, and his presence often unnoticed. Yet he moved with care, cleaning every corner with steady hands, making sure everything was in its place. He did not hurry. He did not complain. His work was routine, quiet, and often invisible, but he took pride in it. He knew the building like the back of his hand. He knew the creaking of the elevator doors, the hum of the air conditioner in each hallway, and the faint smell of coffee that lingered near the break room. Every morning he would sweep the floors, empty the trash, wipe down counters, and polish the windows until they gleamed. He had been doing this for years, and he liked the rhythm of it. There was something calming about it, something simple yet fulfilling. Most of the employees barely noticed him. Some barely spoke to him. He didn't mind. He never sought attention. His satisfaction came from knowing that when people walked into a clean office, they felt comfortable, even if they never thought about the person who made it that way. On that particular morning, the janitor noticed something unusual. A little girl sat in the lobby, her small hands clutched tightly together in her lap. She was quiet, almost invisible among the bustling adults around her, but there was something about her that caught his attention. She wasn't like the usual visitors. He saw she moved slowly, carefully, her eyes scanning the room but not really seeing it. Her face showed a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Occasionally, she would rock back and forth slightly in her chair, and she made soft humming sounds, almost like she was talking to herself. He paused for a moment, pretending to adjust a mop bucket, but his eyes stayed on her. She seemed overwhelmed by the environment, the bright lights, the echoing voices, the constant movement. He could see the tension in her small shoulders, the way she hugged herself as if trying to hold everything together. Something about it struck him deeply, though he didn't fully understand why. He had seen many children in his life, but there was a fragility in her presence that made him slow down. Even in the middle of his work, the girl's mother was nearby, but she seemed distracted, talking to a receptionist and handling paperwork. She glanced at her daughter now and then, offering a reassuring smile, but it was brief, and then she returned to her task. The janitor noticed how the little girl's eyes darted around the room, how she flinched at sudden noises, how her hands trembled slightly. It was clear she was trying hard to cope, but the world around her was too much to process. The janitor moved a few steps closer, careful not to startle her. He didn't speak. He didn't make any sudden movements. He simply adjusted a chair near the lobby, pretending to arrange it, while keeping an eye on her. He had learned over the years that some people, especially children, needed space, and he was patient. There was no rush. He waited, letting the quiet presence speak for itself. The little girl noticed him eventually. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes curious but cautious. For a moment they simply looked at each other. He gave a small nod, the kind of nod that says, "I see you, and it's okay." It was a tiny gesture, almost invisible, but to her, it felt significant. She relaxed just a little, though she didn't smile yet. She continued to rock slowly, her humming softening as if she was sensing that this stranger was not a threat. Around them, the office continued its rhythm. People passed by without noticing the silent interaction. Phones rang, printers whirred, and colleagues greeted each other in hurried tones. Yet, in that small lobby, a quiet bubble seemed to form around the janitor and the girl. Time slowed, and the usual chaos of the office faded into the background. He continued to move slowly, wiping a nearby table, adjusting a magazine in the waiting area, all the while giving her the space to settle. It was not just kindness that he felt, it was understanding. He didn't know her story, and he didn't need to. He simply recognized a person who was struggling and decided, silently, to be there. There was no expectation, no reward, no audience. Just a human connection forming in the simplest way possible. The girl's humming grew quieter. She continued to observe him. She seemed to sense that he was different from the others. He was not speaking loudly, not rushing her, not trying to engage her in ways that made her uncomfortable. He was just there, steady and calm, a presence she could trust. Slowly, she extended a finger and touched the edge of her chair, then the edge of her lap, repeating a small movement she had been doing since she arrived. The janitor noticed. He mirrored it softly, without making it obvious, nodding slightly as he did. It was such a small thing, but it was enough. Enough for her to feel noticed. Enough for her to feel safe. And enough for him to feel that quiet satisfaction that comes from doing something right without anyone applauding. He smiled faintly to himself, careful not to disturb her, but inside. He felt a warmth he rarely experienced during the routine of cleaning floors and wiping surfaces. Other visitors in the lobby walked by, some glancing at the girl, some at the janitor, but most too busy with their own lives to notice. A few paused briefly, sensing something unusual but could not put it into words. There was a softness in the air that didn't belong to the office. A pause in the rhythm of the day that touched even the most hurried hearts. The janitor continued his work, moving slowly, keeping an eye on her without staring. He adjusted a magazine, straightened a chair, wiped a small spill on the floor. Each motion was deliberate, calm, controlled. It was a rhythm he had perfected over the years, but now it had a new meaning. Every movement seemed to echo his quiet concern, his unspoken message, "I am here and you are safe." The little girl watched him, her small face calm now, her hands no longer trembling. She had begun to trust, just a little, and that was a huge step for her. For a child who often felt invisible, ignored, or overwhelmed, the presence of someone who noticed her without judgment was profound. She continued to hum softly, a quieter melody now, almost as if she was responding to the gentle rhythm of his work. Time passed slowly. The janitor didn't check his watch. He didn't rush. He simply existed in the moment with her, creating a space that was quiet, safe, and calm. He did not know how long she had been struggling with the noise and the crowds, but he could feel her tension easing. Her mother, noticing the change, smiled softly, gratitude shining in her eyes. Though she did not say a word yet, it was a simple morning. Nothing extraordinary on the surface, yet something profound was happening. In the midst of a busy office building with deadlines and schedules pressing on everyone, a tiny human connection had formed. It required no words, no gestures of grandeur, only patience, presence, and empathy. The janitor understood, in a quiet, instinctive way, that sometimes the smallest gestures, just noticing, just being there, could mean more than any act of heroism. And in that moment, something shifted. The office, the people around, the little girl, the janitor himself, were touched, even if they did not yet fully realize it. The foundation of a story of kindness, patience, and understanding, was quietly being laid in the lobby of that building. The janitor continued moving, occasionally glancing at the girl. She rocked less now, her humming softer, her eyes following him with a cautious curiosity. She reached for the armrest of her chair, tracing it with her fingers, and he smiled softly to himself. It was a small, silent victory, but it felt monumental. For her, it was a moment of safety. For him, it was a moment of purpose. And for anyone who happened to notice, it was a glimpse of something rare, pure human connection in the midst of ordinary life. The office continued its noise. The phones rang, the computers hummed, but within the small bubble of that lobby, a quiet miracle of attention and care was taking place. It was a reminder that sometimes the simplest moments, unnoticed by most, can hold the greatest meaning. And though no one could yet know how far the impact of this morning would reach, the seeds of trust, compassion, and understanding had been planted, quietly, gently, and without fanfare. By the time the janitor finished his immediate tasks, he paused once more to look at the little girl. Her eyes met his, and there was a small, tentative smile that shone like a light in the middle of a busy day. He nodded once more, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had begun to form. Then he continued on his work, moving quietly down the hall. But the space between them seemed warmer, calmer, and infinitely more human. It was just the beginning of a a story that would grow in small, unexpected ways. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. There was only the quiet understanding between a janitor and a little girl. A connection formed without words, a gentle reminder that true kindness often comes in the simplest forms. Unnoticed, uncelebrated, yet powerful beyond measure. The next day, the office buzzed with the usual energy. Phones rang, employees hurried through the hallways, and the hum of printers filled the air. But the janitor arrived early, as he always did, carrying his mop and cleaning supplies, moving quietly so as not to disturb anyone. He knew the building well. He knew the schedules, the sounds, and the little moments that often went unnoticed. But this morning, he found himself thinking about the little girl he had seen the day before. She had been sitting alone in the lobby, overwhelmed by the noise, the lights, and the constant motion around her. Something about her had touched him. He could not explain why, but he felt drawn to make her feel safe, to be there for her in some small way. He had never sought attention for his kindness, but this was different. He wanted her to feel that someone understood, even if only for a moment, as he made his way through the lobby. He noticed her sitting in the same chair, her small hands fidgeting in her lap. Her mother was nearby, talking to a receptionist, but the girl seemed distant, absorbed in her own world. Her eyes darted around nervously, and she rocked slightly, humming softly. The janitor paused at a distance, pretending to adjust a nearby chair, but his gaze never left her. He wanted to approach carefully, without startling her. He took a deep breath and decided to sit on the floor a few feet away from her, leaning against the wall with his cleaning supplies beside him. He did not speak. He did not rush. He simply existed in the space, steady and calm. The girl noticed him immediately. Her eyes widened slightly, but she did not move away. She tilted her head, watching him with curiosity, unsure of what to make of this new presence. For several minutes, they simply observed each other. The janitor hummed softly, a gentle, soothing tune that he had learned long ago while cleaning late at night when the office was empty. The girl's humming matched his, though hesitantly at first, and then with more confidence. It was a small rhythm, a simple connection, but it bridged a gap that words could never reach. The janitor reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, colorful marble he had found near a lost-and-found box. He rolled it gently toward her, careful not to frighten her. The girl looked at it for a moment, her eyes wide, then slowly extended her hand and picked it up. She examined it carefully, turning it over and over in her small fingers. The janitor smiled faintly, nodding in encouragement. He did not speak. Words were not necessary. She held the marble close to her chest, and for the first time that morning, she smiled. It was a small, tentative smile, but it was genuine. The janitor felt a warmth spread through him, quiet satisfaction that came not from recognition, but from knowing he had made a difference, however small. He knew that for her, a smile was a victory, a sign that she felt safe, understood, and seen. The girl's mother noticed the change immediately. She looked up from her conversation with the receptionist and smiled softly, a tear forming in the corner of her eye. She could not speak just yet, but her heart was full of gratitude. The janitor had not done anything extraordinary in the eyes of the world. He had not bought gifts, given speeches, or performed heroic deeds. He had simply noticed, simply cared, and simply been present, and that was enough. The janitor began to hum a new tune. Slower this time, and the girl responded, matching his rhythm more confidently. He noticed her eyes relax, her small hands unclenching, her body easing into the chair. She began to rock slightly in a more controlled way, no longer frantic or anxious. The connection between them grew stronger, silent yet powerful. He reached out again, this time with a small, soft cloth, gently offering it as if to show her that he could be trusted. She took it cautiously, holding it in her lap. The janitor nodded slightly, his eyes warm and patient. It was a small gesture, but to her, it meant that someone saw her, understood her, accepted her without judgment. Minutes passed, though it felt longer. The office continued its rhythm around them, but within their small bubble, time seemed to slow. The janitor and the girl were no longer two strangers in a busy building. They were participants in a quiet, shared experience. Each movement, each hum, each glance was a thread weaving a connection that would grow stronger over time. The girl's mother finally approached, kneeling beside her daughter. She whispered a soft word of encouragement, and the girl turned her head briefly, acknowledging her mother's presence. Then she looked back at the janitor. There was a small understanding in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement that he was someone who could be trusted. Her mother smiled, her hand resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. Feeling a sense of relief she had not experienced before, the janitor continued his cleaning. Moving slowly around the lobby, occasionally glancing at the girl, he did not want to overwhelm her, but he wanted her to know that he was there, steady and reliable. He wiped down a nearby table, adjusted a chair, and swept the floor in gentle, deliberate strokes. Each movement was calm, measured, and unhurried. The girl watched him, her curiosity growing, her anxiety easing. At one point, a loud noise erupted from the elevator, a dropped tray. A clatter of metal landed. The girl flinched, hugging herself tightly. The janitor immediately moved slightly in front of her, shielding her from the noise. He did not speak. He did not make a fuss. He simply stood there, a steady presence, and gradually the girl relaxed. She looked at him with wide eyes, and he gave a reassuring nod. It was a silent promise that she was safe. Other employees began to notice the scene. A few paused in the hallways, glancing at the girl and the janitor. They could not fully understand what was happening, but they sensed something extraordinary. There was a softness in the air, a quiet tenderness that stood in stark contrast to the usual busyness of the office. Some felt a lump in their throats, moved by the simple act of care and understanding. The girl reached into her pocket, pulled out a small toy she had brought with her. She offered it to the janitor cautiously, her eyes searching his face for a reaction. He smiled gently and accepted it, examining it with care before handing it back. The exchange was simple, almost mundane, yet it held profound meaning. It was a moment of trust, of connection, and of mutual understanding. Time continued to pass, and the girl became more relaxed. She hummed more confidently, rocked gently in her chair, and occasionally glanced at the janitor with curiosity and interest. The janitor continued his cleaning, never rushing, never forcing interaction, simply existing as a calm, steady presence in her world. Her mother watched silently, tears forming in her eyes. She had never seen her daughter respond this way to anyone outside the family. The janitor had not done anything dramatic, but his patience, gentleness, and quiet understanding had broken through barriers that years of instruction and therapy had sometimes struggled to reach. By mid-morning, the girl was smiling more openly, her movements calm and controlled. The janitor had finished his immediate tasks, but stayed nearby, observing her quietly. The connection between them was no longer tentative, had become a gentle, silent bond. The girl had learned that he was someone she could trust, someone who would not overwhelm her, someone who simply saw her for who she was. Other employees began to speak in hushed tones, noticing the change. A few expressed surprise, some admiration, and a few quietly reflected on their own lives. They realized that in the midst of deadlines, meetings, and daily pressures, they often overlooked the simplest acts of kindness. The janitor had reminded them that sometimes smallest gestures could have the deepest impact. The girl's mother finally spoke, kneeling beside her daughter. She whispered words of gratitude, her voice trembling slightly. The janitor nodded politely, brushing it off with humility. He did not need thanks. He had done nothing extraordinary in his own eyes, but in reality he had done something remarkable. He had created a safe space, a moment of trust, and a connection that would resonate far beyond that morning. The girl began to interact more openly. She traced patterns on the floor with her fingers, mimicked the janitor's gentle movements, and hummed softly in response to his tune. The janitor continued his work, moving calmly through the lobby, adjusting chairs, wiping tables, and sweeping the floor. Yet everything he did now seemed to have a new purpose, a purpose that extended beyond cleaning. He was building trust, nurturing confidence, and creating a sense of safety in a world that often felt overwhelming to the little girl. As the morning progressed, the office continued its rhythm around them, But the bond between the janitor and the girl had become unmistakable. It was quiet, subtle, and powerful. No one could fully explain it, but everyone who noticed felt a sense of awe. It was not about words, tasks, or appearances. It was about presence, patience, and the human capacity to care without expectation. By the time the little girl's mother prepared to leave, the janitor had guided her gently back to her chair, offering small reassurances with his calm presence. She clung to his marble and hummed a little tune he had started earlier. Her mother smiled, tears in her eyes, grateful beyond words. The janitor nodded softly, finished his quiet tasks, and moved on to the next part of his morning routine, leaving behind a lobby that felt warmer, calmer, and filled with a quiet sense of hope. And in that small, ordinary office, something extraordinary had happened. A simple connection had formed, a bond that would grow stronger over time. It required no grand gestures, no words of praise, no audience. It was a human connection, pure and gentle, the kind that leaves a lasting mark on hearts and lives. The day continued quietly in the office, but the lobby had a different energy than usual. It was not loud or chaotic. Instead, it carried a gentle warmth that seemed to spread slowly, almost imperceptibly, through the building. The janitor moved through the space with his usual calm, steady rhythm. But today there was something different in his heart. He knew the little girl would be in the lobby again, and he wanted to make her feel safe and understood. It was not about doing something remarkable. It was about being present, noticing her, showing that someone cared. The little girl arrived with her mother, just as she had the previous day. Her mother's face showed a mixture of hope and anxiety. Worried about how her daughter would respond in the busy office environment, the girl clutched her small toy tightly in her hands, her eyes wide as she looked around. The sounds of the office, the ringing phones, the hum of conversations, the distant clatter of printers were overwhelming, as they always were. She shifted nervously in her chair, rocking slightly and humming a soft, uncertain tune. The janitor noticed her immediately. He had finished his early tasks and was moving quietly across the lobby, picking up stray papers and adjusting chairs. When he saw her, he slowed his pace and lowered his eyes briefly in a gentle nod of acknowledgement. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it spoke volumes. She paused in her rocking, her eyes locking on him. For a moment there was stillness. The noise of the office faded into the background. All that remained was the quiet space between them. The janitor sat on the floor again, a few feet away, just as he had done before. He leaned against the wall, placing his cleaning supplies neatly beside him. He did not speak. He did not try to rush her into interaction. He simply existed in the same space, steady, calm, and patient. The girl's gaze softened, and her rocking slowed. She hummed a little less, her eyes tracking his gentle movements. It was a small, silent understanding forming between them, almost invisible yet profound. Then something happened that caught the attention of anyone who happened to glance their way. A loud noise erupted from the nearby hallway. Papers fell from a cart that had been accidentally knocked over. A janitor from another floor passed by, calling out to a colleague. The girl flinched, curling into herself, hugging her toy tightly. Her small body trembled slightly, and her lips quivered. The office around them continued as usual, but in that moment, the world had become overwhelming for her. Without hesitation, the janitor moved closer. He did not touch her, but he positioned himself slightly in front of her, shielding her from the noise, blocking the sudden chaos from her view. His presence was steady, calm, and reassuring. He hummed a soft tune under his breath, the same one he had used yesterday. It was quiet, soothing, almost like a lullaby. The girl's breathing slowed, her trembling eased, and her eyes softened. She looked at him with cautious trust, sensing that he was there to protect her, not to rush or overwhelm her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small marble he had given her before. Rolling it gently along the floor toward her, he gave her the choice to take it or leave it. She hesitated, then slowly extended her hand and picked it up, examining it carefully. The small object seemed to bring her comfort. It was not the marble itself that mattered, but the gesture. It said, "Without words, I see you. I understand. You are safe." The girl's mother noticed the interaction and felt a lump form in her throat. She had always struggled to find people who could connect with her daughter in a meaningful way. And yet here was a janitor, a stranger to them both, quietly offering care and understanding. No one had to tell him to do this. No one had instructed him. It was instinctive, human, and real. Her heart filled with gratitude, though she said nothing. She knew words were unnecessary. The girl began to engage more openly. She hummed in response to his tune, rocking gently in time with the rhythm. Slowly, she extended a finger and pointed toward the janitor, then touched her toy in a tentative gesture. He mirrored her movement subtly, nodding, offering quiet encouragement. The connection grew stronger, wordless yet deeply meaningful. It was a dance of understanding, patience, and empathy that required no explanation. Other employees began to notice. A few paused near the reception area, looking over at the scene. They whispered to each other in disbelief, unable to explain the emotion that filled the room. Some felt tears prick their eyes, moved by the simplicity and purity of what they were witnessing. It was not dramatic, not loud, not staged. It was human, authentic, and powerful in its subtlety. The janitor noticed a sudden shift in her mood. She was more relaxed, her small body no longer tense. Her eyes shone with a hint of curiosity, and she hummed with more confidence. He reached into his pocket again, this time with a small, colorful cloth he had found. He placed it gently in front of her, not speaking, not forcing her to take it. She reached out cautiously and grasped it. The janitor nodded slightly, his eyes warm, patient, and reassuring. Minutes passed, though it felt longer. The office continued its rhythm around them, but inside the lobby, time slowed. The janitor and the little girl had created a small bubble of safety and trust. It was quiet, simple, and yet profoundly moving. She was beginning to learn that she could interact, that she could feel safe outside of her small, familiar world. And he was learning that the smallest gestures, the quietest presence, could make a tremendous difference in someone's life. The janitor's movements were deliberate, gentle, and unhurried. He wiped a table, adjusted a chair, and swept the floor in measured strokes. Yet every movement was purposeful. He was building trust without forcing interaction, nurturing confidence without overwhelming her. The girl watched intently, her curiosity growing, her anxiety fading. She began to hum a little louder, a soft smile forming on her lips. Her mother, observing from nearby, was filled with a sense of relief and gratitude. She whispered softly to herself, careful not to interrupt the bond forming between the janitor and her daughter. She had never seen her child respond this way to anyone outside the family. The janitor had done nothing extraordinary in the traditional sense, yet he had achieved something remarkable. He had created a safe space where trust could grow, where understanding could flourish, where a fragile little heart could feel calm in a world that often overwhelmed her. The girl now began to explore more. She traced the edge of the marble with her fingers, rolled it back toward him, and watched his reaction. He smiled faintly, nodding in encouragement, creating a silent rhythm of trust between them. She began to hum in response to his tune, rocking gently and slowly. Each small movement was a victory, a step toward confidence, and a sign that she was beginning to trust the world outside her immediate comfort zone. Other employees continued to notice, drawn to the subtle magic unfolding in the lobby. They whispered to each other, marveling at the quiet, patient interaction. Some felt tears prick their eyes, moved by the simplicity and authenticity of it. There were no speeches, no applause, no recognition, just pure human connection. The janitor and the little girl had created something extraordinary without even trying. Something that spoke to the hearts of everyone who observed. The janitor continued his careful work, moving slowly, never breaking the calm. He adjusted chairs, wiped down tables, and swept the floor. But all the while, he kept his eyes on the little girl. He was aware of her every movement, her every hesitation, and her every small gesture of trust. He responded with patience, gentle encouragement, and unwavering calm. The little girl in turn began to relax more, her movements smoother, her humming more confident, her small smile growing. Time passed, yet neither of them seemed to notice. The lobby was alive with ordinary sounds, Yet inside their small space, a quiet miracle was happening. Trust was being built, confidence nurtured, and understanding silently shared. The janitor's presence was steady, patient, and gentle, offering something the little girl had rarely experienced: unconditional acceptance and safety. Eventually, the girl's mother stepped closer, kneeling beside her daughter. She whispered words of encouragement, her voice trembling slightly. The little girl acknowledged her mother briefly, then turned back to the janitor. There was a moment of pure understanding in her eyes, a recognition that he was someone who could be trusted, someone who would not overwhelm or frighten her, someone who simply saw her and accepted her without judgment. The janitor smiled faintly, nodding in acknowledgement. He did not speak. Words were unnecessary. The moment itself was enough. The girl began to hum more confidently, her small hands moving with purpose as she played with the marble. The office continued its rhythm around them, but inside the lobby, a quiet, profound connection had been formed. It was a simple interaction, yet it carried immense meaning. The janitor had not done anything grand, but he had touched a life in a way that would have lasting effects. The little girl had begun to trust, to feel safe, and to experience a sense of calm and understanding that she rarely found in the world. And for him, the reward was quiet, deep, and personal: the knowledge that his small, patient presence had made a difference by the time mid-morning arrived. The girl was smiling openly, interacting with him through small gestures and gentle humming. Her mother watched with tears in her eyes, overcome by gratitude. Other employees noticed, quietly reflecting on the power of kindness, patience, and human connection. The janitor finished his immediate tasks, but he did not leave. He stayed close, continuing to offer reassurance, presence, and care. And in that ordinary office, among the hum of computers and ringing phones, something extraordinary had happened. A simple moment between a janitor and a little girl had created a ripple of understanding, trust, and compassion that no one could forget. It was quiet, subtle, and entirely human, a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures have the greatest impact, and that true kindness does not need recognition to change lives. The office had settled into its usual rhythm, with employees moving quickly between meetings, answering calls, and typing at their computers. Yet in the lobby, something remarkable had quietly taken root. The little girl, who had once been overwhelmed by every sound and movement, was now sitting calmly, her small hands gently holding the marble the janitor had given her. Her humming had softened into a soft, almost melodic tune, and she occasionally glanced at the janitor with curiosity and trust. The janitor, finishing his rounds, moved quietly but deliberately around the lobby. Every movement he made was calm, deliberate, and reassuring. He adjusted chairs, wiped tables, and swept the floor, but he did so with awareness of the girl's presence. He knew that even the smallest gestures could affect her mood. His patience and calmness had become a silent shield for her, protecting her from the overwhelming noise and movement that usually made her anxious. Employees passing by began to notice the difference. A receptionist paused in her work, watching the gentle interaction. She whispered to a colleague, pointing toward the janitor and the girl. Other employees slowed their steps, drawn to the quiet warmth that seemed to fill the lobby. None of them could explain why, but it was as if the atmosphere itself had changed. There was a softness, a calmness, and a profound sense of human connection that stood out against the usual busyness of the office. The little girl's mother, standing nearby, watched with a mixture of relief and awe. She had spent countless hours searching for ways to help her daughter feel safe and understood in social environments. But this simple, quiet interaction with the janitor was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She felt tears forming, but she held them back, choosing instead to observe and let the bond between her daughter and the janitor grow naturally. The janitor noticed the mother's gaze and nodded softly, a gesture of acknowledgement. He didn't speak, and he didn't need to. His presence was enough. He had learned that for some people, especially children like the girl, words could be overwhelming. What mattered more was consistency, patience, and empathy. He had offered her a safe space. She was beginning to understand that it existed. Gradually, the little girl began to move a little more. She traced patterns on the marble with her fingers, then rolled it gently across the floor toward the janitor. He picked it up carefully, turned it over in his hands, and rolled it back toward her. Their small exchange became a game, simple yet profound, building trust with every passing moment. She laughed softly, a sound so quiet it almost blended with the hum of the office. But to those who heard it, it was magical. Other employees couldn't help but notice. Some whispered to each other, marveling at the interaction. A few felt their hearts swell with emotion, realizing that they were witnessing something rare, an authentic human connection, formed not through grand gestures or speeches, but through simple patience, care, and attention. People began to reflect on their own lives. How often had they overlooked small moments of kindness? How often had they ignored the quiet struggles of others around them? The janitor continued to move slowly around the lobby, sweeping the floor, adjusting chairs, and occasionally glancing at the girl. His calm presence had become a steady anchor for her, a source of comfort and reassurance. She began to hum louder, smile more openly, and even reach out occasionally, touching his hand lightly as if testing the boundaries of trust. He responded with gentle nods and quiet encouragement, never rushing her, never forcing her into interaction. As the morning progressed, the ripple effect began to extend beyond the immediate space. Employees in nearby offices began to pause and watch. Some whispered to colleagues, sharing their observations. Others quietly reflected on the janitor's humility, realizing that his work went far beyond cleaning floors and wiping tables. He was touching lives, offering empathy and understanding in a world that often lacked both. The little girl's mother finally spoke. Kneeling beside her daughter, her voice was soft and trembling, but it carried words of gratitude. The janitor nodded politely, his eyes warm and patient. He didn't seek recognition or praise. He had done nothing extraordinary in the conventional sense, but the effect of his quiet actions was profound. The little girl had begun to trust him, to feel safe in a place that had once been overwhelming, and that trust would ripple outward in ways that no one could yet predict. The girl now began to interact more confidently. She hummed along with the janitor's tune, rocked gently in her chair, and even traced patterns on the floor for him to notice. Each small gesture was a victory, a sign that she was learning to navigate the world with a sense of safety and trust. The janitor responded with the same quiet patience, acknowledging each movement with a gentle nod or a soft smile. Other employees continued to notice, their curiosity turning into admiration. Some felt tears in their eyes as they watched the scene unfold. It was not dramatic, not staged, not forced. It was simply human. The janitor and the girl had created a space where trust and empathy could flourish. Anyone who witnessed it could feel its impact. The office, usually filled with noise, stress, and deadlines, seemed quieter, softer, and somehow more compassionate. The little girl's confidence continued to grow. She began to explore the space around her, occasionally standing and moving a few steps toward the janitor, only to retreat briefly and then try again. Each attempt was met with gentle encouragement, and each success built her trust further. The janitor's calm presence and steady patience had become a source of strength for her, something reliable in a world that often felt unpredictable and overwhelming. The ripple effect extended even further. When a few employees from other departments came to observe, they whispered to each other in awe, sharing their thoughts quietly so as not to disturb the moment. Some felt inspired, reflecting on how small acts of kindness could create profound change. They began to think about their own interactions, realizing that even a simple smile, a nod, or a moment of patience could transform someone's day, or even their life. The janitor noticed the increased attention, but remained focused on the girl. He understood that the ripple effect would take care of itself. His priority was her comfort, her sense of safety, and her trust. He continued to move slowly around the lobby, cleaning, adjusting, and offering silent reassurance. Each movement was deliberate, mindful, and filled with purpose beyond the surface task. The girl's mother finally spoke more openly, expressing her gratitude in soft, heartfelt words. The janitor acknowledged her with a gentle nod. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic speeches, only a quiet exchange of understanding and appreciation. Yet in that small, ordinary moment, something extraordinary had occurred. The little girl had begun to trust, to feel safe, and to experience a sense of calm in a world that often overwhelmed her. By midday, the lobby had transformed in subtle but profound ways. The girl was calmer, more confident, and engaged with her surroundings. The janitor had finished most of his tasks, but remained nearby, providing a steady presence. Employees continued to pass through, some pausing to witness the quiet miracle unfolding before them. They whispered to each other, reflecting on the power of empathy, patience, and understanding. The little girl now began to experiment with small interactions. She offered the marble to the janitor, then took it back, her eyes shining with curiosity and trust. She hummed in response to his tune, rocking gently and smiling more openly. Each small gesture was a victory, a sign that trust and understanding were being built. One moment at a time, the janitor continued his work with calm focus, moving around the lobby, wiping tables, adjusting chairs, and sweeping the floor. Yet everything he did now had an added layer of purpose. He was nurturing trust, creating a safe space, building a bond that would have lasting effects on the little girl, her mother, and everyone who witnessed it. The ripple effect grew even stronger when a few senior employees entered the lobby. They paused, noticing the interaction between the janitor and the girl. They whispered to each other, moved by the simplicity and authenticity of what they were seeing. Some felt tears prick their eyes, realizing that acts of kindness and patience could have profound consequences. The janitor did not seek recognition, but his actions were inspiring everyone around him. Reminding them of the power of empathy and human connection, the little girl's mother watched quietly, overwhelmed with gratitude. She had struggled for years to find people who could understand and connect with her daughter in meaningful ways. The janitor had done so without effort, without expectation, simply through presence, patience, and care. She whispered softly to her daughter, who acknowledged her with a small nod. Before turning back to the janitor with trust in her eyes by late morning, the little girl was laughing softly, her small body moving with more confidence. She hummed along with the janitor's tune, reached out with her hands to touch the marble, and even explored a few steps away from her chair. Each success was met with quiet encouragement, patience, and understanding. The janitor's steady presence had created an environment where trust, safety, and confidence could flourish. Employees passing through the lobby continued to notice, some pausing to witness the quiet miracle unfolding before them. They whispered to each other, reflecting on their own actions and interactions. Some felt tears in their eyes, inspired by the authenticity, empathy, and patience displayed by the janitor. Others reflected on the struggles of the little girl, realizing how simple acts of care could profoundly impact a life. The janitor remained calm, patient, and focused. He knew that each small gesture mattered. He wiped tables, adjusted chairs, and swept the floor, all while maintaining awareness of the little girl's needs. His presence was steady, reassuring, and gentle, creating a safe environment where trust could grow. As midday approached, the ripple effect extended even further. Employees began to interact more kindly with each other, inspired by the quiet example they had witnessed. Small gestures, a nod, a smile, a moment of patience, became more common. The atmosphere of the office subtly shifted, infused with warmth, empathy, human connection. The little girl, now more confident, began to explore the lobby further. She hummed, laughed softly, and interacted with the janitor through small gestures. Each success was met with gentle encouragement, reinforcing trust and understanding. Her mother watched quietly, tears of gratitude in her eyes. Overwhelmed by the simple yet profound impact of the janitor's presence, by early afternoon, the lobby had transformed. The little girl was calm, confident, and engaged. The janitor, having completed his work, remained nearby, offering reassurance and support through his steady presence. Employees continued to observe, inspired by the quiet display of empathy, patience, and understanding. The ripple effect had spread throughout the office, touching hearts, inspiring kindness, creating a more compassionate environment. In that ordinary office, something extraordinary had occurred. A simple moment between a janitor and a little girl had sparked a ripple of empathy, trust, and human connection that would be felt far beyond the lobby. The janitor's quiet patience and care had transformed the little girl's experience, inspired her mother, and moved everyone who witnessed the moment. It was a powerful reminder that true kindness requires no recognition, only presence, patience, and understanding. And in that quiet, gentle way, the janitor had changed not just one life, but the atmosphere of an entire office, leaving a lasting impact that would continue to ripple outward in ways no one could yet fully comprehend. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows of the office building, casting a warm glow across the lobby. The little girl who had arrived that morning nervous and anxious now sat calmly on her chair, her small hands playing with the marble the janitor had given her. Her humming had become a soft melody, and every now and then a bright, genuine smile would appear on her face. It was a smile that had been rare for her in public spaces, a smile that reflected trust, comfort, and a growing sense of safety. The janitor watched her quietly, his movements slow and deliberate. He continued his work, wiping down tables, sweeping the floor, and adjusting chairs. But his eyes constantly returned to the girl. Every small gesture of hers, every tiny sign of trust or curiosity was significant. To anyone else, it might have seemed like an ordinary day, but for the girl and for the janitor, it was extraordinary. It was a day in which small moments became monumental, a day in which the power of patience, empathy, and quiet presence was revealed in its purest form. Her mother stood nearby, her eyes glistening with tears. She had watched her daughter go through so many overwhelming situations in the past, and yet now, here in this ordinary office, she saw her daughter truly relaxed, truly at ease. She wanted to say something, to thank the janitor properly, but words felt inadequate. Instead, she simply watched, letting the connection unfold naturally. She could see the bond that had formed between the two of them, bond based on trust, understanding, and kindness. The janitor, noticing the mother's gaze, gave a small nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, humble and sincere. He did not need thanks. The smile on the little girl's face, the soft humming, and the gradual ease in her body language were more than enough. To him, this was not a heroic act, or something to be celebrated. It was simply human, simple, and real. He had created a space where the girl could feel safe, and that was reward enough. The little girl, sensing that the janitor was paying attention to her, began to explore the lobby a little more boldly. She moved a few steps toward him, then back to her chair, testing her comfort level with each movement. Each time she approached him, he responded with patience, quiet encouragement, and gentle acknowledgement. He did not rush her, he did not force interaction, and he did not overwhelm her with attention. He allowed her to set the pace, to grow in confidence on her own terms. Employees passing through the lobby continued to notice. Some stopped, whispering to each other about the quiet miracle they were witnessing. Others felt tears forming in their eyes, moved by the simple authenticity of what they saw. The janitor and the little girl had created something extraordinary, not through grand gestures or dramatic actions, but through patience, empathy, and gentle understanding. It was a reminder to everyone present that true kindness is often quiet, subtle, and profoundly implied. At one point, a loud noise echoed from a nearby office, a dropped binder. A shout from a meeting, but the little girl did not flinch. The janitor's steady presence had become a shield, a source of reassurance. She glanced at him briefly, then returned to her marble, rolling it carefully across the floor. The movement was deliberate, playful, and full of trust. The janitor picked it up, turned it over, and rolled it back toward her. Their silent exchange had become a language of its own, one that required no words, but conveyed understanding, empathy, and connection. The little girl's mother finally approached, kneeling beside her daughter. She whispered softly to her, words of encouragement and reassurance. The girl responded with a small nod, then turned back to the janitor, her eyes shining with trust. The mother's heart swelled with gratitude, a gratitude that was difficult to express in words. She realized that this janitor, A man she had passed by countless times without noticing, had done something remarkable. He had reached her daughter in a way that no one else had, offering understanding, patience, care, without expectation or demand. Other employees continued to observe from a distance. Some whispered quietly to each other, sharing the impact of what they were seeing. Others felt a lump in their throats, moved by the simplicity and authenticity of the moment. The janitor's actions had created a ripple effect, inspiring kindness, patience, and reflection throughout the office. People began to think about how they could apply the same gentle understanding in their own lives. Realizing that small acts of care can have profound consequences, the little girl now began to explore her surroundings more confidently. She hummed a soft tune, picked up small objects, and even began to make tiny movements toward the janitor. Each gesture was met with gentle encouragement, subtle acknowledgement, and quiet reassurance. The bond between them was becoming stronger, rooted in trust, empathy. In the simple presence of someone who cared, the janitor continued his work around the lobby, moving slowly and deliberately, but always attentive to the little girl. He adjusted chairs, wiped down tables, and swept the floor. Yet his actions had a new purpose beyond their practical function. They had become tools for connection, patience, and reassurance. Every movement, every gesture, reinforced the safety and trust he was creating for the girl. The girl's mother spoke softly to the janitor, her voice filled with emotion. She expressed her gratitude, though words seemed insufficient. The janitor simply nodded, acknowledging her thanks, but he did not dwell on it. He had not acted for recognition. His satisfaction came from seeing the little girl smile, hum, and engage with her surroundings in a way she had not before. That was enough. As the afternoon progressed, the little girl's confidence grew. She laughed softly, her small body moving with more ease, and she even experimented with new interactions. She rolled the marble toward the janitor in playful ways, hummed louder, and occasionally reached out to touch his hand lightly. Each small step was a victory, a sign that trust and understanding were deepening. Employees in the office noticed the transformation. Some paused to watch, whispering in awe. Others reflected on the lessons of the day, realizing how powerful patience, empathy, and gentle attention can be. The janitor, who had once been invisible to most, had become a symbol of human kindness and connection. His simple actions had created an atmosphere of warmth and understanding, inspiring everyone who witnessed them. The little girl's mother knelt beside her daughter, holding her hands gently. She whispered words of encouragement, her voice soft and filled with emotion. The little girl nodded, then looked at the janitor with trust and affection. It was a moment that would stay in the hearts of everyone present for a long time. The janitor smiled faintly, acknowledging the connection without words. His presence steady, patient, and reassuring. As the afternoon wore on, the lobby became a place of calm, quiet, and human connection. The little girl explored a few more steps, rolled the marble back and forth, and hummed a soft melody. The janitor responded with gentle nods and small smiles, reinforcing the trust and understanding that had developed. Her mother watched silently, overwhelmed with gratitude. Knowing that her daughter had experienced something extraordinary, a connection, safety, and reassurance that would stay with her long after they left the office, the ripple effect continued to grow. Employees who had witnessed the interaction began to treat each other with more patience and empathy. Small gestures of kindness, a smile, a nod, or a quiet word of encouragement became more common. The office, which had once been filled with stress and urgency, began to feel warmer, gentler, and more human. All of it had started with the quiet presence of a janitor who noticed a little girl, understood her needs, and offered patience, empathy, and trust. The little girl now laughed more openly, hummed confidently, and interacted with the janitor in small, playful ways. Each gesture was met with gentle encouragement and subtle reassurance. Her mother's eyes glistened with tears of gratitude. She knew that this simple moment, this quiet bond, had created a profound change in her daughter's life. The little girl had begun to trust the world outside her immediate comfort zone, and it was all because of the janitor's patient, gentle presence. Other employees continued to notice. Some moved to tears, Others inspired to reflect on their own interactions. They realized that the janitor's actions were a reminder of the power of empathy, patience, and human connection. It was not about grand gestures, recognition, or fame. It was about noticing someone in need, offering calm presence, and allowing trust to grow naturally. By late afternoon, the little girl had become more relaxed, confident, and joyful. She hummed, laughed, and even moved a few steps closer to the janitor. Each small action was met with patience and quiet encouragement. The janitor's presence had created a space where trust, safety, and understanding could flourish. His humble, gentle actions had transformed not only the little girl's experience, but also the hearts of those who observed. The little girl's mother approached once more. Kneeling beside her daughter, she whispered heartfelt words of gratitude, and the little girl nodded, acknowledging both her mother and the janitor. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a testament to the power of kindness, patience, and human empathy. The janitor smiled faintly, his heart full. Knowing that the impact of these moments would last far longer than anyone could see, as the office day came to a close, the janitor finished his tasks. But he lingered for a moment longer, watching the little girl. She waved a small hand smiling, and he waved back softly. It was a small, simple gesture, but it carried profound meaning. They had shared something rare and beautiful, a connection built on trust, patience, and empathy. The little girl left the office that day with her mother, holding the marble tightly, her face glowing with confidence and joy. The janitor watched them go, a quiet satisfaction in his heart. He had done nothing extraordinary in the traditional sense, but the impact of his actions was extraordinary nonetheless. He had changed a life, inspired others, and reminded everyone that the smallest gestures often carry the greatest power. And so, the story ended not with fanfare or recognition, but with quiet satisfaction, warmth, and human connection. A simple moment between a janitor and a little girl had left everyone in the office touched, inspired, and reminded of the profound impact of patience, kindness, and empathy. It was a day that no one would forget, a day when ordinary actions created extraordinary change. The janitor returned to his work the next morning, as he always did, moving quietly through the hallways, wiping tables, sweeping floors, and adjusting chairs. But the world felt different now. The little girl had smiled, laughed, and trusted, and the ripple of that moment continued to grow. Employees treated each other with more care, smiles were more frequent, and the atmosphere of the office had shifted subtly but profoundly in the end. It was a reminder that true kindness requires no applause, no recognition, and no reward. It is found in noticing those who need care, in offering patience and understanding, and in allowing trust and empathy to flourish naturally. The janitor had done all of this quietly, humbly, and without expectation. Yet the effect was unforgettable, and the little girl, who had once been overwhelmed and anxious, now carried with her a sense of trust, confidence, and joy, forever changed by a simple human connection.